So I'm about to begin to prepare my photo that I'm going to be painting, my still life. I'm preparing it to transfer it to the watercolor paper for this project. And in order to do that, similarly to when we did our practice cup, I'm going to need a piece of transfer paper much larger than what we used for the cup. And again, you can see this has been used for by other students, and it's okay. It can be reused many times. So I'm going to be placing this with this graphite side down. Remember, it has a dirty side and a clean side. So I'm going to place it face down on my watercolor paper with the dirty side down. So again, this underside is what will transfer. And once I have that positioned, then I'm going to lay my photograph on top. And I've got a nice white margin around here, so I can lay it right against the edge of the paper. Now, obviously, it's not going to fit on this edge over here because this transfer paper is wider than I need, and I'm going to clip on these two sides so that I make sure that this is lined up and this is lined up. So I have two paper clips, and I'm going to clip on opposite corners of my photo. So I'm going to clip there, and then once more down here in this corner. And now at this point, I'm ready to begin transferring using my pencil. And I want to make sure that I'm working with a pencil that has a hard lead, and I want to make sure that, which an example of a hard leaded pencil would be like your 2H would be the perfect choice. So I'm going to be working with my 2H. I also want to make sure that I'm working directly on the hard tabletop. I don't want to have anything soft like a folder or anything underneath or my portfolio. I want to make sure this is directly on the table because I want to make sure that I'm getting a good impression through the paper to transfer the image below. I also recommend that I'm going to just trace the corners. I don't have to go all the way down the sides, but I definitely want to make sure that I know where the corners of my paper fall. One other line that's critical is this line where the black and white background cross the frame. So I want to make sure that I'm definitely getting that line in as well. So when it comes to tracing and transferring, I got my corners indicated. I'm just going to go ahead and start. Now, there is a shadow line here. I don't think I want to make a hard line there because you can see it's a soft blended edge. I don't want to put a hard line there because that would show. So I'm just going to trace around my shape of the leaf. And remember, any mark you make on this top surface is going to transfer below, including a swipe of my fingernail across the surface. Any marks like that will continue to mark on the paper below. And I want to make sure that my paper is showing what I want to show, which is the parts of the flower in this case, not necessarily where my fingernails touched it. So that would be a stray mark that I don't want. So I want to make sure that I am getting all of the lines needed to have all the marks that I would need in order to paint this well. So make sure that you're looking for the edges of the petals, and make sure that the shapes that you're creating are closed, meaning they begin and end at another line. So I don't want to have any bits of where it just leaves it open. So like right here, there's it's hard to see where the edge would be. I can see the edge here, but there's no edge there. But I'm going to draw it in because I know that I need to make sure that my shapes are closed. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard for me to paint within the cells if I don't have closed shapes. So I'm going to guess that this goes right up to the back edge of this petal. And this petal's kind of overlapping there. It's important that as you work that you pay attention to where you have drawn already and where you haven't, so that you can go back and fill in sections. Make sure that you're getting all of the lines needed. And if I need to draw like these ridge lines, I could because they're a crisp line. I might put those in. That would probably be helpful to have when I'm painting. I don't want to have to guess. So I'm not going to have you watch all of this. I'm going to come back when I have this completely transferred. But I do want to mention that if you are working with a photograph that is not very clear, or maybe has been a little washed out and your flower kind of looks blobbish, you want to make sure that you look for areas where you could create edges to the petals. Don't make a blob, or you're going to be painting from a blob, and that would be very difficult to do. So make sure that you are defining where petal shapes might be. And if you think, well, maybe once when I have the clips off, that I'll be able to see better where the petals could lie, and you could even look at the actual flower that you photographed for more information as well, because we'll have the basket of flowers here. So you can certainly do that. Every once in a while you may want to check underneath and make sure things are transferring well, and they are, so I'm good. Now here is interesting because I think this leaf goes all the way underneath. It's just dark there and hard to tell. So I'm going to go with that idea that is leaf all the way up underneath there. And again, I'm not going to be drawing that line because it's soft and I don't want to end up with a hard line there. Same thing here. This is not the edge of the petal. That petal goes underneath, but there's a very strong, dark shadow edge there, which I don't want to interfere with. I'm going to allow that to be a soft edge when I paint. So I'm not going to draw that in. I'm going to be painting that in later. So you're going to have to kind of look at the shapes that are before you and make some decisions about which ones you feel are most critical for you to be able to paint from. And draw what you think you're going to need. And this flower has lots of petals. It looks like maybe this. I'm kind of inventing that one because it looks like it kind of is in there, and there's another one poking out there. And again, if it's hard to tell, you can use your best judgment. No one's going to look at the photograph and say, hey, you didn't put that one petal exactly where it's supposed to be. As long as they see a beautiful flower, you're going to be okay. But you do want to make sure that you're paying attention to the shapes and looking at where they begin and end so that you end up with a believable shape that really looks like a flower. All right, so I've got a leaf up here, and then I'm going to pause the video and I'll come back after I have everything else traced. So I'm tracing the glass, and I thought I would pause for a moment and just talk a little bit about what's going on in the glass and what parts I felt I needed to trace around. First of all, you've got these highlights that are stark white. I don't think I got that one. Oh yeah, I did. So I want to make sure that I'm definitely getting any of these bright white highlights traced around. I also did a few of the shapes that are kind of a little bit off color inside the shapes, just so I make sure that I'm getting those. Yes, there is a stem that runs down inside here. I could certainly get some tracing there, just so I would know that that's kind of where that stem falls. And it picks up again down here. I'm not going to close that shape just because I don't need it super defined when I'm painting. Some of you are going to have an exposed rim around the mouth of the bottle, which you'll definitely want to make sure that you pay attention to where the rings are on the top, because typically these bottles have a neck and a ring around the top, so you want to make sure you look at that. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about these shapes, this big light shape and this kind of lumpy dark shape here. What do you suppose those are? Well, that edge here, this kind of grayish area, is actually the reflection of this white board up onto the glass. So I definitely want to make sure that I include that, because that is an important part of what's going to help me make this look realistic, because we know that that reflected light is bouncing down onto that surface and then up onto the glass front. So I want to make sure that I am making sure that that edge, where that light gray area begins, is a reflection from that area below. I also wanted to point out this darker shape here. What do you suppose that is? That is actually the reflection of this bunch of grapes onto the glass here, because it's sitting there. It's going to cast that shadow up onto the glass. So that is definitely an important shape as well. Now on my grapes, there is a highlight, but I am not going to trace around that. Otherwise, I would end up with these hard shapes, and that's where it's really light, and I don't want those pencil lines to interfere with my with my drawing. Now also with grapes, grapes tend to be a little bit more of the most challenging of the fruits. So if you chose to do grapes in your photo, just know that you've got an extra challenge level there. It's important that you look for very carefully where the grapes overlap, and if you can't see the edge between the grapes, don't make it as one big lump, because then it's not going to look like grapes at all. It's going to look like a big lump. So I'm going to have to try to figure out where the edges of these grapes fall, because it may not be super apparent in my photo, which it is not. So I want to make sure that I'm really looking carefully, because there's very dark shadow areas where I can't tell where one grape ends and one grape begins. Now some of the grapes I can see the stem work below, like this one I can see the stem. So I want to make sure that I'm including the stem. This one I can clearly see the stem going to this grape. So I want to make sure that I include those stems as well. Now when it comes to the cast shadows, I definitely want to make sure that I'm getting the cast shadow in place. I don't think I did the bottom of the vase. And I can always lighten my lines for my cast shadows if I need to, which I probably will. Erase a little bit from the lines that I've created, and that's okay. I can always erase. This is just graphite transfer paper, so it'll erase just like a pencil. And again, I am not tracing around those light spots. I'm not doing that. I want to leave the lightness of the paper to be kind of drawn to as a focal point on each grape. I don't want to have as a highlight. I don't want to have that harsh line on there. I want to be able to blend to it using the wet on wet technique that we've been practicing. All right, so I'm almost done with these grapes. Do the stalk here, and then I'm going to create the edge where the dark and light background merge. I can peek underneath. Let's see if there's anything else that I need. Okay, I think that all looks pretty good. So I think I've traced everything that I need, and we'll come back when we're ready to do the next step. All right, so I've removed the paper clips and then took my tracing paper away and moved my photo. Of course, I'm going to keep it because that will be my guide for when I'm painting. And I just want to kind of look over my whole image here and see if there's any edges or lines that I need to touch up and make sure that it all makes sense to me. Looks like I missed a little area in here on my photo. So I just kind of want to check it over, make sure it all makes sense. Now I've got some dark patches here that were created by the paper clip. If I wanted to erase that, it falls pretty much outside of my edges of my composition. I have my corner marks here, which I am going to use to help me position my masking tape. Looks like I missed an edge here, which kind of jumps up and over. So you can actually add some pencil lines. I would just keep them very light. We don't want anything that's heavy or dark. So there's my grapes. Went right down to the edge of the paper. So this all looks pretty good. I feel like I'm ready to attach this to the board. Now I'm working with a very small board. I want to make sure I leave the bigger boards for you students. So I'm going to position my board, or my paper, so that it's got a nice halo of edge around it, because I need to tape it into place. And using the blue painter's tape at your stations, at your sink stations, you should be able to create a border. Now the reason why we tape our paper down is because we're going to be applying a lot of water to this, and it is going to warp if we don't put tape around the edges. And even though the paper is made of rag, like we talked about, that's a cotton paper, it still can warp some, especially when you're really applying a lot of water to it. So I want to make sure that I'm really pressing that tape down firmly so that I get that really adhered. And I want to put tape all the way around. No edges of your paper should not have tape on it. It should go all the way around the whole thing. And at this point, I'm going to try to match up the tape with the edge of the corner marks that I made. So here's my corner mark up here, and I've got the paper mark there, or the pencil mark, so I want to make sure that I'm lining that up. And across the top. Again, I'm looking at my 2 pencil lines that I made when I indicated where the corners are. And then I've got one more piece of tape to go down the side. And yes, this is going to go on top of my paper. You can see there's an edge of the paper here. So this is going to create the border for my painting, but I still need to make sure that I've taped down this paper here too. So I'm going to put another piece of tape down that side to hold that paper down. Otherwise, this is loose and it's going to end up bowing on this edge where the other 3 are sealed. So I want to make sure that my paper is secured, but then I'm also creating this piece for my edge to create the edge of my painting, so where the paint will stop. All right, so this edge is just going to go down to seal that paper to the board. All right, so now this is ready to go. I'm taped all the way around, and I am ready to start on, probably begin with my background.